Greetings, one and all. It is I, your professor of conjure, Dr. Treasure. I just got back in the house from a walk and picking up a hoodoo supply from the most unlikeliest of places. But if you don't already know, hoodoo is about what is available, using what's around you, and not ordering fancy things. Even though fancy things are fun, it's fun to order fancy chalices and aged leather grimoires and all that stuff. But also sometimes you just pick a dandelion, pick some mint out of your backyard. Get some water from the river. What's available? Because as we know, the ancestors didn't have Amazon. So that being said, if this is your first time hearing and or seeing me, my name is Dr. Treasure Shields Redmond, and I am a poet, professor, novelist, archivist, and conjure woman. And this is my Root and Word series where I share with you the intersection of hoodoo and real life. Real life, real life. So you might see me looking over a little bit because I made some notes about what I wanted to talk about today, which is removing the blinders. If you want to hear the banishing spell that I wrote, delivered with, you know, uh, precision and intensity, you can go over to my Patreon. I'll put the link in the description and listen to it for free. I think you will really enjoy using it as a meditation, as an affirmation, and as a spell. I come from a tradition of extemporaneous prayers in the Baptist church in which I was raised, where people had to come straight off the dome. They had to freestyle. And my mother was somebody who was gifted at those kind of extemporaneous prayers. And I feel like I have caught the baton and moved it forward a bit with the banishing spells that I have been composing and casting. So, blinders. Hoodoo is about, hoodoo causes you to have the blinders slip from your eyes. And what do I mean? So I'm going to start with this analogy. When my children were toddlers, I would present them with two pairs of shoes and tell them that it was time for them to pick what they were going to wear that day. It might be a white shoe and a blue shoe. And then they would pick what they were going to wear. And in their minds, they had surveyed every choice there was. But I knew that I had controlled the arena, I had controlled the choice. I had given them their choices, but they didn't know that what they thought was the wide array of options were two curated choices, decisions I had made for them, right? So we believe in society that we're operating with all the information, but we are not. And particularly when when the agents of evil, the Europeans who orchestrated the world sexual trafficking mission that we know as the transatlantic slave trade, decided that they would also use Christianity to as an assist in their dominating program. They did the same thing. They created a world in which the choices seem to only be Christianity. That's what the choices seem to only be. Because not only are most people, specifically in the US, Christian, um, but Christianity before the US was founded through European ways of thinking permeated the cultural production. So it's in the plays, and it's in the stories, and it's in the songs. So it's not just inside of a house of worship, it is in the teacher when the teacher says, well, we're going to learn about Frankenstein today and how Frankenstein is a Christ-like figure. Hmm. Or we're going to study um, dark magic, right? We know that black in the Bible is associated with unclean and evil, and white in the Bible is associated with celestial and heavenly and clean. So, in those ways, Christianity is kind of running in the background like a background script, like background programming. So, once you realize that there is a such thing as hoodoo, um, you realize you're like a horse with blinders on. Hoodoo makes itself known after those blinders have slipped down, and you go, oh, I can look to the left. Oh, I can look to the right. So, what is hoodoo? Hoodoo is what African American spirituality transformed itself into uh, upon arriving here in the southern part of the United States. That's what hoodoo is. Hoodoo is the descendant and one of many descendants, because all over the diaspora, or where Africans um, landed specifically during the transatlantic slave trade, there is obia, there is voodoo, there is all kinds of uh, African spiritualities that were transformed by the land and people who took them there. So, hoodoo's existence points to something that predates Christianity. And why do I say that? Well, the King James Version of the Bible was created in 1611. We are in 2024, right? 26 rather, 2026. So that means that we are 400 years um, past when the King James Version of the Bible was made. So that version of the Bible is not that old. And then we think about older versions of Christianity, right? So oftentimes when black people point out, black people in the US point out that Christianity was given to most black people here through enslavement, there are people who they feel protective of Christianity. So they say, well, no, Africa had Christianity. It was in Ethiopia. Okay. Yes. So Ethiopians adopted Christianity in the 4th century. We're in the 21st century. So 21 minus 4 is 17. So 17 centuries ago, uh, there was Christianity on the African continent. So we know that the first humans emerged on the continent, and that for many thousands of years prior to the arbitrary first day in time that the that the enemies of good, the European colonizers, created, prior to that first day of the first century. And you may be wondering, how do they know when time started? how what what do they count as the first, moment of recorded time? What makes it day one of century one? Well, you guessed it. The purported life of Jesus Christ. And I do mean purported. So we know that Europeans decided that this would be the first day of the first century, but that people had been around for many thousands of years before that. Um, and they've decided that the time before their arbitrary first day of recorded history gets to be called BCE, before Common Era. Some people still say before Christ, but BEC means before Common Era. ERA. So, of course, there was time before the first, and I'm putting heavy quotation marks around that, before the first century. There was time, there were events, there were moments, there were days turning into night, moon cycles, rotations around the sun, many, 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 many of them before the quote unquote first day of the first century. And when you learn about hoodoo, that is made clear. You go, So those of us who are African Americans are connected to a lineage that is ancient. And we are still practicing something that was created before that arbitrary first day of the first century. African people who still exist today were composing their own holy texts, creating their own holy symbols and symbology to accompany their complex ways. And how do we know that? Well, we know that hoodoo, which is commonly spelled in the US as HOODOO, is widely accepted to be kind of a corruption of an African word. There were people in West Africa, in what is today Ghana, Togo, and Benin, who were called the Ewe people or Ewe people, EWE. And they used the word hoodoo. So I'm going to read this. This is from the Encyclopedia of African Religions. In the Ewe language, hoodoo, HUDU, or hoodoo, WUDU, refers to both a specific dialect / language variety of the Ewe people and a term for traditional spirit work or magical traditions. So hoodoo was hoodoo on the continent. We carried hoodoo with us to the US, to the United States, to North America. In West African traditional religion, hoodoo represents a respected system of spirit work, divination, and herbalism passed down through family priestly lines. Connection to hoodoo. The term hoodoo is widely believed to be an etymologically derived from the Ewe hoodoo concept, combined with practices that survived the transatlantic slave trade. Even our incredible conjure woman and sociologist, ethnographer, supreme, the great Zora Neale Hurston, whose book I'm holding up, Their Eyes Were Watching God. But if you want to read about hoodoo, you should read her extensive study, Hoodoo in America, or her book, Tell My Horse. Even she, in a footnote, talked about the Awe people and how thousands of them were kidnapped and enslaved and landed in the southern U.S., bringing hoodoo with them. So the more you travel the conjurer's road, the more you'll see. The more you'll see. The further down your blinders will slip. I'm going to end here, but if you go over to Patreon, you can listen for free to my podcast there. And this week's podcast is a recitation of the I Banish Your Blinders, Banishing. This video will continue in the version that the $7 tier members belong to, because I'm going to show a ritual for removing blinders, removing blind spots, so that you can see what's being hidden from you. Ashe. See y'all next time.